Well, hello everyone. We are once again recording live from Studios B3. That's Studio SB3 because I am Spencer Brinkerhoff III. Welcome to our Star Wars Rebels video roundtable. We're talking about Season 3, Episode 14, titled The Trials of the Dark Saber. Now, this episode originally premiered on January the 21st of 2017, and this one was amazingly written by Dave Filoni. So let's get things kicked off today and introduce our guests. I am first a big welcome to Jan Smith. Jan? Oh, I clicked on
Hey,
Tom. Hey, Jan, there you are.
there I am.
Welcome to the show, Jan.
Thanks for having me, Spencer.
Now, as we kick things off and get started, how about a brief introduction to everybody who's listening out there or watching? Jan, tell us about how you sort of like got into Star Wars. How did you get yourself involved in all of this stuff?
Oh gosh, when have I not been involved? 4 years old when Star Wars first came out. I've been a fan ever since. I'm 43 years old, so I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I've been a fan on board since the beginning. I remember Christmas. I don't remember which year specifically it was, but getting the Star Wars Cantina playset with the four creature action figures. They had the
Right,
Hammerhead, Greedo, Walrus Man, and Snaggletooth because that's all they
right,
were named then. They didn't
right.
actually have names.
That was what they were named then.
And I got the cardboard set out and didn't realize the figures came with it and threw the package in the garbage. My mom went and dug from the garbage, got the figures out. Can you believe it? I would have thrown away the ultra rare, elusive blue Snaggletooth.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
yeah, and it's been a lifelong passion since.
Now, did that hammerhead, did it have a cloak originally, or was it just like wearing this blue smock kind of a thing?
If I recall correctly, it was just wearing the blue smock thing. And
Okay.
each one came with a blaster. He came with, I think, a Stormtrooper blaster. Greedo
Oh,
came with a Han Solo blaster.
right, right. Of course, of course. Nemesis and all. Thanks. Jan, I'm glad to have you on the show today. Our next guest is Mr. Tom Hutchins. Tom, welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, Tom, in addition to being a Star Wars fan, I've got some other graphics here up on the screen to introduce you. You're kind of involved with those Mandalorian guys, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. That's yeah, that's a little bit, just a little bit. Yep.
Tom, give us your official title with the Mandalorian Mercs.
Sure. I'm known as Mandalore the Uniter. I'm the founder of the Mandalorian Mercs and the leader.
The leader. So the Mandalorians Mercs, similar to the 501st, is a costuming group within the Star Wars universe, but they focus on those bounty hunters. And one of the things that I've always thought that was wonderful about what the Mandos do is the customization. So, there's Boba Fett's out there, but, there's so much more, right?
Yeah, we're most of us are custom characters. We're our own characters, and I think that's kind of our hallmark as a group is that we really we're big on creativity. We want people to be able to have their own little slice of Star Wars without having to look like the next guy down the line. You're your own character that you create, and you create their armor, their costume, and you wear it. So it's pretty neat. It's very artistic.
Very much so. Excellent. Well, thank you. We're all in here together, and today, of course, we're talking about the episode, "The Trials of the Dark Saber," which is all about some of this Mandalorian culture and Sabine and her trial and her journey. So let's kick things off. So this whole episode, Sabine begins her training with the ancient Dark Saber, right? And the idea is to unite Mandalore. And if we can unite Mandalore and all of the Mandalorians, then the rebels get a huge sort of like boost to their firepower. And this is super important. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, and maybe I'll throw this over to you, Tom, tell us a little bit about, I don't know, I want to get into a little bit of the history, but let's talk about maybe Rebels history and Clone Wars history. And can you tell us a little bit about Death Watch and sort of like set up this episode for us with your understanding of Mandalore and how they all fit together in the Rebels universe, or maybe some extra information as
Sure.
well?
Sure. Well, we'll go back just a touch back before Clone Wars. Death Watch had been around for a long time. It actually came about in the comics, the Jango Fett comics, Jango Fett Open Seasons, when Hayden Blackman came up with the whole Death Watch as just a splinter, ultra violent sect of the Mandalorians. And so that translated over to Clone Wars. Dave Filoni and crew, they liked that the name and the symbol and all that the Death Watch used. So they used that in Clone Wars to describe a very similar sect of Mandalorians during that timeline, which would be the warrior caste of the Mandalorians. In Clone Wars, when we first get to the Mandalorians, we see the new Mandalorians who are pacifists basically, and of course
Oh.
there was a huge fan outcry. There was like kill them all, and yeah, it was not taken well at the beginning, but we got to know about the new Mandalorians, about how they came into existence, which basically I'm not sure how much of this translates over into the new EU, but the Jedi defeated the Mandalorians several hundred years prior to that, and the new Mandalorians took over to keep Mandalore from being destroyed. Basically,
Right.
They exiled the warriors, and the warriors became Death Watch.
Right. Right.
And so Death Watch comes back in Clone Wars, and they take over Mandalore again with the help of several other cartels and with Darth Maul. And then Darth Maul turns on the leader of Death Watch, who's Pre Vizsla,
Right.
and kills Pre Vizsla and takes over Mandalore. And then that's kind of where it's left in the cartoons. Then they had the comic Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir.
Oh,
And
right.
that was actually right. And that was actually, they wrote that comic, so it is part of the new EU, but they wrote it off of the scripts from the next season that just didn't get produced.
Right.
So that would have been the evolution. And then, of course, in Sons of Dathomir, you see where the Mandos are they're back to their customized look again, and they don't have. There's not a lot of people looking the same, which was cool for us. We're like, yeah, that's awesome.
More
And
more
then,
guys, more armor to base your own creations off of,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And
Right.
then we get to Rebels, and the first introduction to the Mandalorians we have in Rebels is Sabine, who is wearing some really cool, kind of very customized, very artistic,
Right.
in her own rights on the armor. And then last season we got introduced to more Mandalorians who are the Mandalorian Protectors, which is another group that came out of the old EU. So they are pulling several things
Right.
out of old EU.
Now, the Mandalorian Protectors, though, just to sort of like make a little bit of a distinguish between these different clans that we've got, the Protectors have sworn their allegiance to the Empire. Is that correct? Is that
They're
how it
acting
works?
more like mercenaries. They're more like
Okay.
mercenaries. If you watch that episode, you'll see the Empire goes and actually pays for their service.
Oh, gotcha.
So they're doing the Mandalorian mercenary thing, because they know Fen Rao, who is the leader of the Protectors. He
Right.
knows that we can't really fight the Empire. We don't want to be part of them. But we can't fight them, so we'll work with them as long as it's convenient to us and it's helpful to us.
Right. Right.
The way the structure in Mandalore works at this point, as far as clans and all that goes, is you have houses who are like the dominant family, and then underneath those houses you have several other clans.
Right.
So, Clan A could be part of House B, and Clan C could be part of House D or whatever. It's almost like family trees. If you look
Right.
it's kind of like the way the Scottish clans are set up, where you have clans and then septs, which are subfamilies under the main clan. So
Right.
it's they're trying to keep it close to the way it was written before. They're pulling a lot of elements in.
Yeah.
But I think it's really, I really like the direction that it's going, and
Right.
they're really, Mando fans can kind of relate to what's going on.
Thanks. Now, Jan, I wanted to ask you a question as well. So, well, we're going to talk quite a bit. We'll have lots of questions, but in reference to Death Watch and Pre Vizsla, who was sort of the original, sort of like the first guy that we saw in the Clone Wars that was in sort of like rebellion. He was the real sort of like Mandalorian. He was the first one that we saw wielding the Darksaber. So tell me about your impressions of the Dark Saber, and did you think that it would become something more, or was it just like a super vibro blade kind of a thing? What did you think about that introduction of Pre Vizsla and the Dark Saber?
I remember hearing something about the Dark Saber before the Dark Saber was introduced in the Clone Wars. So I was really curious about it. I would have liked for them to have explained a lot more about it because it was really this awesome, mysterious weapon, and basically it looks like a black lightsaber. And so I think that there was a lot that was left unanswered that left me wanting more, and I think we're starting to get that now in Rebels.
Right.
And yeah, the mystery behind that, I think it's kind of with Boba Fett. There's only so much that you really want to tell because you want to keep that mystery that makes it so cool to begin with. It draws you in to begin with. So I like what they did with a little bit of exposition in this episode, but not giving us so much that it just completely explains it. Yeah,
right.
Because I think that was a failing with Boba Fett going back with the prequels and sort of explaining everywhere that don't do that. Just leave some things a mystery.
And I
agree.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really loved about this is when Fen Rao kind of gets to have his sort of like explanation part. And to me, it reminded me of the Genndy Clone Wars series when Anakin was having sort of like his Force vision and he saw himself sort of like as Vader in the future. And so when we have this history of, this first sort of like Jedi Mandalorian, I'd never heard of that before. So Tom, is there anything in sort of the history that talked about Mandalorian Jedis?
No, in fact, it's almost, if you think about Mandalorians and you think about Jedi and the ethos behind them, it's almost an oxymoron in and of itself when you say it that way.
Right.
Because you have Jedi who are, they basically are all about non-attachment, where you have Mandos who are completely attached to their tradition.
Right.
And, the one thing that I think if you go back and you look at the episode, I think it's really cool when Fen Rao says, the legend of the Dark Saber is. So we really don't know if that's the truth. We just know that it's a legend.
Right.
And I think that really, to me, that helps to make it mysterious, and it keeps people from getting too fanboy angry at oh, now they're gonna they're diluting down the Mandalorians by making them Jedi.
See, and it's one of the things that I actually added into my notes. I'm going to look to the side here and read this. So there was an episode when Kanan and was it the season finale last year? Kanan, Ezra, and Ahsoka, they go to Malachor, and Kanan says that Malachor has always been off limits to the Jedi, and Ezra says why, and Kanan says old legends, stories told to us as younglings in the temple, and then Ahsoka says there's always a bit of truth in legends. So exactly. I love that you brought up that part because there is that little bit of truth in the legends. Now, Jan, I was thinking about this a little bit more, and I wonder, do you think that after, help me with his name, that first Tar Vizsla,
Yes.
Tar Vizsla. So when Tar Vizsla became that first Jedi, do you think that he was the only Jedi afterwards, or that was a Mandalorian Jedi, or do you think that like there were more potentially?
That's a good question. I'd like to think that he was the first and only, if he did exist, because that leaves a lot of mystery still there, which is what I like. It kind of leaves that. So much is just shrouded and we don't know. So I would like to think that he was the only one. Again, going back to Mandalorian culture, if they had a successive line of Mandalorian Jedi, I think that would detract from the uniqueness of him being the first and only Mandalorian Jedi.
Right. And so something else that I really liked about that is I think that what ends up happening is because there is this legend of the Dark Saber and this legend of Tar Vizsla, right? And his wielding, it has a certain sort of like feeling of Excalibur. You know, he who yields the sword becomes the ruler to unite the clans. And so we've got this legend, this Excalibur sort of a feeling. And then we get to this point where it's like, okay, we can learn to fight with a sword. We can learn to fight with many weapons, but, you know, we don't have the force powers. And so, Tom, I love that they brought in that when Fen Rao shows up to the training, he brings a special gift for for Sabine. Let's talk about the gift there. Wait, what, Jan? What was that? I got that.
Sorry, don't want to ruin the surprise.
What was the gift that Fen Rao brought for her?
Sure, he brought her a set of Mandalorian van braces.
Right, and they weren't called gauntlets. They weren't called.
Nope.
They were called van braces.
Braces.
And it was right there in the middle of the show. And it was like everybody is supposed to know what that is. And it's like, no, you'll pick it up if you know what it is, right?
Right. Well, technically, that is the actual term for that armor piece. I mean, if you look at if you have any knowledge of medieval or Renaissance style armor or period armor, those are van braces that go over your lower arm. So that's actually a discussion that Dave and I had at Celebration London when we invited him to the Mercs dinner at Celebration London, and my wife and I sat with him and his wife, and we talked about this, and he's like, yeah, we're the armor, we're trying to make it so that it's termed more similar to what armor is termed as.
Right.
And we've always known that as gauntlet armor, because if you go back and look at a lot of the old reference material, it's listed as, Boba Fett's gauntlet armor.
Right.
So it's kind of actually nice to see it get a real name for what it really is. But I think, one of the other cool things about this episode, and it's a tidbit that Kanan says, and it kind of harkens back to some history with Mandalorians and Jedi too, is he tells Sabine, when they're training, he says, history lesson, the Jedi beat the Mandalorians.
Oh yeah.
So we know that the Mandalorian Wars, I mean, that right there kind of says, okay, well, there was a war between Mandalorians and Jedi.
Right.
Was that the Mandalorian War of several thousand years ago?
We'll see, right?
I'm hoping that we get more, that they bring more info in about that, or at least they use that to help bring some stuff back from the old, from the Legends books and stuff. So,
Jan, what do you got?
Here's a little bit of speculation. So, the Jedi defeating the Mandalorians, would it be implausible that the Mandalorians pulled a little bit of Jedi lore into their culture, and specifically the Vizsla pulled that into their culture? They didn't have the abilities or the wherewithals to produce their own lightsaber, so they created the Darksaber, because we've never seen a black lightsaber before, so it's something completely unique. The way that it sounds, the way that it looks, the hilt of it, everything's completely unique. So with the legend, it would be interesting if there was no original Mandalorian Jedi, and it's something that they just because the Jedi were so powerful warriors, that they just pulled a part of that into their own culture and adapted it to their own culture, and over time this legend was created.
So
totally possible.
Truth, and then kind of
Yeah, and that's what legends really are. And so something else that I like about that, Jan, is that you've got this Darksaber that is supposedly very ancient, and as being ancient, it maybe has a little bit of a crackle to it, similar to Kylo Ren and his sort of like crackle and unstable sort of like a blade. But something about that emitter blade, it gives it a different shape. It really is awesome all the way around. But something else that you said is something that I was thinking about as well. So as these Mandalore have been exposed to some of the Jedi culture and some of their ways, and we get into this situation that there was this Mandalorian Jedi war. We know that there was, because Kanan references it, right? Some of the things that these, I'm going to say it wrong, van braces, right? Some of the things that the van braces does is that it helps to compensate for a lack of full force abilities. Now,
yes.
Tom, you wanted to comment on that too?
Yeah, Fen Rao actually says that they were designed to repel Jedi.
Oh, right. He does
So
say that. He
yes,
does.
he does say that they're specifically designed to repel Jedi. So they have the repulsor on there, which almost kind of acts as a force knockback, and it's got the whip. It's got I believe missiles on it, stuff
Right.
like that. So it's he specifically says that they're designed to repel Jedi. So that's very poignant. That Mandalorians are they are warriors that are very adept at fighting Jedi
Right.
without the use of force powers. So
Well, and something else that it reminded me of that I was kind of excited about. Have either of you guys watched the Avatar series, the cartoons? We've got Avatar, and then we have Avatar Korra. Have you guys seen those at all?
No, I haven't.
I have not.
So in the first series, it's all about these different sort of like each like race has a different sort of like ability, similar to what either it's wind power of fire, earth, all of these things, and then the Avatar is the one that can wield all of these powers. Well, in the second series, in Avatar Korra, one of the things that was really interesting is that there was a group of people that were anti benders. So the benders are the people that had the powers. And they were anti-benders, and they started to develop technologies that could simulate some of these same powers. So I'm sitting here watching, the Van Braces in action, and she does that like force push kind of a thing. And I was like, oh man, that's just like on, Avatar. It's like they're making up their own force abilities through a technology to help sort of like simulate all of this stuff. And I really enjoyed that part of it a lot. Now, another thing that I was wanting to talk about is, let's see, the Force. We started to talk about the Force a little bit, and I think that it was super important in this episode. Some of the things that Kanan said about the Force and what it is. So Jan, I want to kind of turn to you a little bit and talk about this training sequence. So we get set up, we get there at the camp, and he gets everything rolled out, and he starts to talk a little bit about with Hera, and they're talking about the Force. Do you remember what he says about the Force and how it works or what's important about it?
I'm going to sound like an idiot here, but I don't recall specifically what it was that he said.
Well, what he was talking about was that the Force resides in all of us. So, I mean, I think that where I want the conversation to go is what I always thought the Force was when I was a kid, and then what the Force became with the prequels and midi-chlorians. So, what he talked about was that there's Force in all living creatures, and that because there is Force in all living creatures, then we all can sort of harness that, but then maybe it's just those that have more Force abilities, it's closer to the surface. So
Right.
that's kind of the part that I was getting at, was that, did you feel that we were getting back to that original feeling of the Force and getting away from sort of that technical side of the midi-chlorians?
Oh God, I hope so. Because for me,
yes, me too. Me too.
that's what always made the Force so cool. Again, it goes back to the mystery. It's never, there's not a whole bunch of exposition about it in the original trilogy. It's just this energy that surrounds us, it penetrates us, and it's in everything. Without going into a whole lot of detail, I like what the idea of the Force, not getting back to the technical side of midichlorians and midichlorian counts, but the Force being in all of us, and whether or not somebody's open and receptive to that and knows how to recognize it.
Right.
So I like that idea that potentially every being out there has Force potential, but whether or not you recognize that in yourself and you're able to, you have the discipline to harness that and bring that forth, I think is an awesome aspect. It goes back to almost it gets back into the mysterious, almost religious part of the Force, which is something that I liked from the original trilogy, is that it had this very spiritual connotation to it.
Now,
And
Now, Jan, you don't see the screen that I have up because I'm live switching between these. But what I've done on your image, I've got your name down here. I've got a little icon from Facebook, and I thought it was funny. I've added the two Ewoks and they're wearing the white hoodie and the ties, and they're holding up the sign that says "Awake," and it's got their god 3PO, the goldenrod,
That's
right?
awesome.
So here you are talking about getting back to the spiritual side, and here is "Awake." Have you heard about our Lord and Savior C3PO? But really,
Cool.
so I love that aspect of it, right? So now we're I think that what we're doing is we're seeing a bridge too. So Tom, one of the things that happens is we see that, in the prequel trilogy, one of the fall or the downfall of the Jedi was all about them sort of like thinking that they were better than everyone else, maybe thinking that they
Right.
were arrogant and they were proud, right?
Very. Yep.
And you had to scientifically prove whether or not you were worthy enough to be part of the Jedi Order, but only if you were of a certain age. And now we have Kanan. Kanan didn't really complete his his training, but he was knighted, and we saw that in Rebels. But here we also have Kanan is sort of like a transitional Jedi. So how do you feel about Kanan representing like new Jedi ways? Is he leading up to where Luke Skywalker is going to be?
I think Kanan is almost starting to sound a little Obi-Wan-ish.
Ah,
He's,
in what way?
well, he's starting to get, and I wonder if Bendu has something to do with this, but he's starting to get
Ah,
more spiritual. If you in this episode, when you were talking about him speaking with Hera, I thought it was really cool how he says, he talks about Sabine being, she's, yes, all living beings have force in them, but Sabine is cut off from that,
right.
being able to channel it. And he's like, because she's so, and Hera says Mandalorian.
Now,
So,
is that an insult? Coming from our Mandalorian merc, was that an insult? Was that a cut to Sabine?
well, no, I mean, I think it is indicative of Mandalorians themselves, in that, they're very, of course they're very technologically minded, but they're also they're very much traditionalists. They're very, they're very much rooted in certain things that make them very headstrong and stubborn. And I think that that gives them a very weak attunement to the Force, because they have
Right,
so many other things that they're just not open
right.
to the Force, like,
Well,
like a Jedi or a normal,
right.
person would be, I guess, that,
And I agree with that. That because of their training, sort of conditioning, and their tradition, that they are sort of like cut off to that. But at the same time, I feel that potentially their sort of like natural skill, that technique that they have, that the way that they can get into a battle, sort of that hunter instinct. I feel like some of that is almost a force ability, that you've got that sixth sense about it, and I feel that the Mandalorians are attuned to it in that way. But also, as an artist, I love that Kanan made that comparison, that she is so open and she's so creative, but she's so closed in this way. That's conflict that's going on inside of her. So with that conflict, what do you guys think, Jan? We got to learn a little bit more about what's going on with Sabine's past and her story, and she mentioned the weapons that she made, and then the weapons that were used to like enslave her people. Did that set off any red flags for you, or what did you react to that scene?
Um, red flags. I don't know if red flags. It's an interesting story point, and I can see where Sabine would be very closed off because of that. If you produce something that ends up, turning around and killing your people and being used to kill your people, I can see where she would feel almost in to self-imposed exile. I know that she was distanced from her family,
Right,
but I wonder how much too because she left, and how much of that was self-imposed exile because she wanted to distance herself from all of that. And I think that guilt, a lot of survivor guilt because of that, and I
yeah,
think that her turmoil that she's dealing with, that is she hasn't really found that inner peace. She still has that. She, like you said, she's very expressionist with her art, but she's still struggling with that part of herself. So she's put up all these walls, erected all these walls, so that nothing can get through and nothing can penetrate that. Well, if she's going to open herself up and maybe become more attuned to the Force, not necessarily going down the Jedi path, but being more attuned to it, she's got to let down those barriers to a certain degree and open herself up to, I don't say, the greater universe.
Well, and also I think that she really, when she started to confront all of those feelings, I think that she really started to sort of like get into sort of like that fighting style, and she started to use all of her skills. She was, using the whip, and she was really, really being successful at that point. But I also, the reason I was asking a little bit about the weapons is here we are, we're just coming off of Rogue One. And Rogue One was all about the Death Star and the secrets of the Death Star and the plans. And then she makes an offhand comment that here she was making these weapons, and the Empire was using these weapons to take over worlds. And they were taking over her world. And I kind of went, okay, she wasn't working on Death Star plans, but, here they are. The Empire is still looking for these weapons. So I thought that was a really good point as well. I like that element of that scene.
Absolutely. Okay.
Go ahead.
I think that it's something very characteristic of the Empire to use every asset that they have available, because people and colonies and worlds to them are just assets to be exploited, as we know through the whole. Yeah, and so I think that's great that they have all these little irons in the fire all over the galaxy. So they have Mandalorians are working on specific weapons for them, and maybe it's a starship, maybe it's blasters. Who knows exactly what it is that they're working on? And then probably on some other world, someplace they have somebody working on a bioweapon, kind of like we saw in the Separatists doing in Clone Wars.
Right.
And then we have, the ultimate weapon being the Death Star. So that doesn't surprise me with the Empire and kind of what we know about the Empire, to use all of the available assets and just milk everything for what it's worth.
Right.
I think another thing to think about too is when Sabine says that the weapons that she made were used to enslave the Mandalorians. This is not a new story about Mandalorians. That actually happened in Legends in the old Marvel comics. In the comic Escape from the City of Bone, actually chronicles Princess Leia helping Fen Shaisa and Toby Dala to break the slavery that the Empire has imposed upon Mandalore. And so this is not an old, that's not an old story either.
Right.
She's just basically saying, the Mandalorians are enslaved.
What's going on with
we
this
already
warrior?
Knew that happened.
What's going on with this warrior race that they keep getting captured? I mean, that doesn't sound right.
That's the way it works with warriors. You rush into battle, and sometimes you don't think about the consequences.
Oh, totally.
And if they were after the Clone Wars, if they were still pacifists, as we saw with the Clone Wars series, if they still were pacifists and they haven't re-embraced that warrior culture aspect of themselves, it would be much easier for the Empire to come in and subjugate them.
Right.
Because if they're not fighting, they're not putting up a fight. They don't have a standing army. The only thing that they had close to that was Death Watch, and we saw what happened with Death Watch. So it's interesting if the Empire knew that and exploited that.
A lot of that goes back to the Sons of Dathomir comics, which is the stories that happened right after the Clone Wars. And the Mandalorian army that was raised by Maul was pretty much decimated.
Right.
They fought against both sides for the most part. They were like a third wheel in the whole, in the whole, 3 or 4 battles that they had. They were like a third wheel against the Republic and the Empire.
Right.
And the Emperor was like, wipe them out, get rid of these guys, because he knew they were going to be a thorn in his side. And if he got rid of whatever standing army Mandalore had, then all he had to do was just put a garrison in there, and he'd be good to go. And that's pretty much what happened.
Right.
That's pretty much how it went down.
So one of the things about this episode, speaking of sort of like where it's going and potentially uniting everyone, right? One of the things that was most frustrating about this episode is that I watched that mid-season trailer, and I saw that part where Sabine like shows up with the Darksaber, right? And there's her mom, we assume, like standing there on the porch. And I'm going, oh man, this is going to be so awesome. And I'm watching the episode, and all of a sudden it ends. And I was like, oh, no.
Darth Vader, no, right?
Yeah, no. And it was done, and I was like, we just barely got started, you know? I was like, where's the rest of this episode? So
We gotta wait a month.
I
You know?
know. I think it's February
Is it the month
18th.
next one?
Yeah, the next one's like not till February 18th. So anyway, with that in mind, there was a couple other key, not key elements, a couple other points that I thought were really fun that I wanted to point out. I wanted to ask you guys if you had noticed these things. So when they first got to camp and they started to set things up, did you guys feel that this was like Luke Skywalker on Dagobah, and he was totally setting up, you know, his camp, and then Yoda is supposed to like wander in at any second, and there's the little like power generator, and it even had the little tiny like that light, you know, it was sort of like had a base and the post in it that Yoda took, and
Little
R2
lamp.
was trying to get away. I mean,
Rewatch it again because like, man.
all of that stuff was there, even the little box that had like his rations and stuff in it. Did you guys see that at all? Did you get a Yoda vibe at all in this sequence?
You know, I didn't
Oh
catch
yeah,
it. I'll rewatch it tonight. I didn't catch that.
I caught it, and you know, when Sabine goes out on her own there and Ezra comes and talks to her, and then as she's getting ready to turn, you know, and go back, we see Bendu
Right.
show up
Right.
for a moment, who is kind of like, you know, he's kind of the Yoda right now.
He
You know,
is.
the
You know,
Yoda that
I hadn't thought about that.
So we did kind of get the entire Dagobah scene there. You know, we
Nice.
really did.
Nice. So I think that's something else, is that I think that with the last episode in the in sort of like the guide that's online, they said that episode with Zeb, that was originally going to be the part B story to Sabine's training as the part A, and they were going to flip back and forth between those. And as they started to develop it even more, they're like, these are two standalone stories. And so I think that Bendu may have originally had a larger part in this sequence, but in the end, Bendu is the great observer, right? So I as soon as I saw her go out and like kick that rock, I was like, it's going to be Bendu. I thought it was going to be Bendu. Now, Jan, what do you think about Bendu as sort of like the Yoda for our chopper-based Dagobah scene? Does that work in with sort of like your Yoda feelings at all?
I don't know what to make of Bendu. I almost get a feeling with him that he's more like I'm going to mispronounce your name here, but Vergir from the New Jedi Order series.
Virginia.
Okay.
There you go. Where there's she kind of seems helpful, but there's a malevolent side to her. But then again, is it really that case, or is she ultimately serving the Force? She's not serving the light or the dark. She's serving just the Force.
Right.
And so I kind of get that vibe from him a little bit, that he doesn't care what path somebody walks down, as long as they're staying true to themselves and staying true to the Force, because that's ultimately his guide.
See, and in that way,
he's a neutral entity. I mean, he's basically Force neutral.
Right, right. So in that way, it reminds me more about what we saw with the brother, the sister, and the father with the Mortis trilogy, is that we're getting exposed to different elements of the Force. That, you know, there's not just the light side and the dark side that the Jedi and Sith, but there's more elements to it. And so Bendu sort of like embraces this other sort of like this hippie vibe, you know? He's kind of cool with a lot of different Force things going on, right? Now,
well, what I think is cool is that name, you know, I don't know how many people know this, but Bendu is actually one of the original Jedi names. It was Jedi Bendu, I believe. It was written in the script that way, in the original script.
Right, right.
Know that?
So, in speaking of names, I wanted to make another sort of like call out. So, for those of you who know or don't know, I used to live in Japan. I was a missionary there for 2 years, and my son's there now. And so I think about things, and I think about the Japanese language, and there's a lot of different like elements. So I think that George is pulling a lot of these resources from different cultures and different languages. So with the names, I remember I actually have bought a wooden sword. It's made out of a tree, right? It's wood. It's a katana, right? Which is the sword, and the word for wood is bow. So the Bo-Katan or the Bo-Katana is the wooden sword. And so in this episode, we see Kanan talk about the training sabers, and and then Hera goes, "You mean those sticks that you and Zeb made?" And I was like, "Yeah, they are. They're just sticks." And I was like, "Wait a second, that's a Bo-Katan, which is Bo-Katan?" I was like, wait a second, that's like from the Clone Wars series. Bo-Katan was one of the characters rumored, or speculated that she might be Sabine's mom, but I don't think that she is. But it'd be great to get Katie Sackhoff back into, recording some more voice stuff. So,
well, she actually did. I mean, she actually spilled the beans on that back, I believe, in August, where
really?
they are bringing Bo-Katan back. I was told, and I don't want to get too far into this because I don't know if what I was told, if I'm supposed to say it or not.
Don't say who told you. Don't say who told you.
I won't say who told me.
So here, say it this way. I heard.
I heard. There we go. A little bird.
A carnivore.
That Bo-Katan will be back. We just don't know at what point in this. I believe she'll be back in this season,
right
towards the end. I think there's a Mandalorian episode at the end of the season.
Right.
I believe that she's going to be in that episode. From what I was told, she will be back. We just don't know at what point in the season she'll be back.
Awesome.
So she will get a cameo.
That'd be great because Sabine, I mean, at this point, she has to go back to Mandalore. I don't think that there's any way story-wise that they can avoid that happening unless she just completely. Oh, go ahead.
Sabine's not going to be. I mean, she's not Sabine's mother. I have my own guesses on who Sabine's mother might be. I don't know if I want to say that. I guess I can. It's a guess. It's speculation.
Tyler Westhouse, who's a wonderful friend. He's actually suggested that it's somebody that we've seen in the Son of Dathomir comics. Because
that's what I think it is too.
Fen Rao was in was one of the only other named characters from the Son of Dathomir comics, and there was one other character, I don't remember her name, but he's the one that says
Cast.
Yes.
Cast.
So, John, what do you got?
What if this is just a complete total what if, but it would explain a couple of things. If she is the daughter of Satine and Obi-Wan, because if she's going to be a little force sensitive. Would kind of sort of explain that if she's the daughter of Obi-Wan, and because we know that they had a relationship of some kind.
Right.
Whether or not it was ever went as far as being physical, we know they had a relationship of some kind. And her age, about 16, 17 years old, would put it right in line with that, with the time difference between Clone Wars and Rebels, and then Obi-Wan and Satine's relationship before we see Satine for the first time in Clone Wars. So the time frame fits.
Right.
If she does have that little bit of.
And I'll say that there's a possibility that anything could happen, but just because there's a possibility doesn't mean that we have to make that connection. So I think it might be too easy for them to do that. Tom, did you have a comment on that as well?
Well, no, I mean, I guess like you said, anything's possible. I don't know that I would necessarily go that route with it. If you go back and watch the Clone Wars episodes where they talk about and they only very briefly talk about the time together that Satine and Obi-Wan had, and Obi-Wan was still a Padawan during that time. He was still with Qui-Gon when Satine was under attack by what we can guess is maybe the Death Watch even then. So I don't know that they were together long enough in any capacity to have, conceived a child. It's always possible, but I don't know that line is right. I don't know that those dots can connect.
No, there might be too much time then. It would place Sabine far too young then.
Well, but the other thing that it does is it sort of negates one of the points that we talked about today, is that the Force resists, it's in all living beings. And as such, we don't necessarily have to be born of Jedi lineage to be able to call upon some of that Force power. And in that way, we get to own it a little bit more. We get to be part of the Force because there's a chance for us to actually do that. And I love that we're bringing back to sort of like this spiritual side of things. And so I think that there's a chance that it could be Obi-Wan's, but I don't think that they'll do that. I think that we're going to see a whole nother family here. And I mean, it's just, it's just super exciting to have, more stories to talk about. So,
I think they're waiting
Absolutely.
to tell us that Rey is Obi-Wan's granddaughter or something.
yeah,
Oh man,
that'll that'll
I
be the
hope it's
next
not
one.
something so on the nose like that,
Yeah.
I just had to throw that out there.
Well, and speaking of Obi-Wan, I wanted to ask you guys if you had any sort of closing impressions, but I also wanted to bring up a little bit about Obi-Wan and talk about uh, the final battle there between Sabine and Kanan. As they were going up and down the sides of that little like training area, the grounds, please tell me I was not the only one who was thinking, I have the higher ground, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
So as they were fighting and they kept switching positions about who had the higher ground, and then there was that kick, that side kick, the same kick that Luke used to knock Vader down the steps, and that's when she had the higher ground and she made that breakthrough. And for me, that combined with the other references to the greater story of the Mandalorians, finding out more about her story, Jedi Mandalorian. This was just a huge episode. Did you guys have any thoughts about that sequence specifically, or any other sort of like parting thoughts that you thought, okay, hey, we forgot to talk about this one? Any ideas? How about you first, Sean?
I thought it was brilliant letting her kind of come out of her shell there. I thought it was brilliant the way that they set it up, and again, talking about the Force being in all of us, it also kind of shows her embracing a little bit of that anger and fear that's in her.
Right.
Maybe a little too much like Anakin. And what I can see, and again, this is just complete speculation, is I can see Ezra, if she turns out that she is, oh wow, she's unrecognized Force potential, and she really is very powerful in the Force. Again, just speculation. It'd be interesting to see, because we've seen a little bit of the dark side already in Ezra. That Ezra becoming jealous of, if Kanan starts to train Sabine and becomes more focused on training Sabine because she's a little bit more serious and a little bit more dedicated. That Ezra becomes jealous of that relationship there, and then sort of recedes into the dark side, because we already know that he's been exposed to it. He's already kind of been corrupted, at least to a certain degree, by Maul.
Tasted it. He's tasted it a little
Yeah.
bit.
So it'd be interesting to see if they go that route. But I thought it was fantastic that we're really seeing Sabine come to her full potential, and we're seeing that, because I think that
Right.
at first she was it was a cool side character, but she was far underutilized
Right.
in the series. I thought too much focus on Ezra, and I know that that's kind of where the story has been going, but the background characters, to really see her come into her full potential, and having been, in my opinion, so underutilized before, it was fantastic to
Right.
see.
And
Yeah.
one of the things that I really enjoyed is we have this intro where we got to see all of that animation and Fenrir was explaining what's going on, and then we have the opening title of the Star Wars Rebels, and that this is going to be a little bit more serious episode when they don't do the it was a subdued sort of an intro, but then the very first shot that came up after that was Sabine's painting in her bunk of her family, meaning the crew of the Ghost. And so you knew that this one was going to be quite a bit about family. Tom, what do you got? Thoughts about this one, or impressions?
I think you just kind of outlined my parting thought, and it's one that has permeated Mandalorian culture in Star Wars, all the way back to the legends, which is the most important thing to Mandalorians, to true Mandalorians, is their family. That has always been the number one thing. You put your clan before anything else,
Right.
and I think she even says that. She says that when they're fighting, when she um, lets her anger and her fear get to her when they're fighting, and she says, for a Mandalorian, a family's the most important thing, is basically what she's saying, and I think that is, to me, is very important to hear that, and to hear that they are holding to that part of Mandalorian culture, because it is very important.
Right.
Um, to
And,
and that's important to her.
Right.
And I think that will define her, in the long run.
Right. And I
And
love
Kanan
that.
reinforces that.
Go ahead, Jan.
If I'm not mistaken, Kanan reinforces that when he tells her that basically, no matter which decision that you make, we're your family, and
Right.
we're always going to
Right.
be here for you.
Right. And he pointed out that he says, yes, your family is in prison, but they're in a prison of their own making. And
Oh,
it's up to
making.
you to help them get out of it. And so that's empowering her. Sort of along those same lines, sort of my parting thoughts, and I'm going to kind of look over to the side here so I can read a little bit. So the scene where Kanan realizes that through Hera's promptings that he was sort of like holding back on his training because he wasn't letting Sabine own this saber, letting it own this part of her life, and he handed her the blade, and her first thing that she said was, "Oh, it's heavy." Right? And then he says, "Yeah, it is." And he says, then as she sort of like lit it up, he's explaining it to her. Energy constantly flows through the crystal. You're not fighting with a simple blade, you're directing a current of power. Dude, this is so awesome. This is so awesome. And then he says, your thoughts, your actions become energy, and they flow through the crystal as well and become a part of the blade. Oh my gosh. So even though Sabine does not have a Jedi level of the Force, she can use her own Force energy, energy that exists in all living things, focus her thoughts and her actions into actual energy through the blade, and then the blade becomes lighter because she becomes one with it. Fantastic episode. Wonderful,
Absolutely.
wonderful writing
Yes.
by Dave Filoni.
My favorite episode so far.
Oh, of course, and
I gotta say,
seconded by the next one, right?
Yeah,
oh, geez.
exactly. Yes.
I hope that Dave Filoni keeps on writing more like this and stays with and doesn't do go off and do some other offshoot within Lucasfilm, because
Right.
that I think without Dave Filoni we wouldn't have the Clone Wars that we had. We wouldn't have the Rebels that we have, because it's amazing with all the stuff that he's pulling in, the little things here and there that he's pulling in, bringing back into canon. Thrawn,
Right.
bringing back everything back into canon, which is for me as a fanboy, it just puts me with a smile ear to ear every time I see some little piece that's pulled back in. I'm like, yes, Dave, yes, yes,
Yep.
yes.
Exactly. And I think that he's been trained to sort of like take up this mantle, but at the same time, the whole group that's there at Lucasfilm just keeps on adding more and more good stuff. I'm pretty sure that Ezra was pouring blue milk out of his canteen. I mean, it's all there. We're all in it, right? Well, all right,
Well,
guys.
they're all fans.
Yeah, we're all fans, and having the opportunity to work in that sphere, it's got to be such a wonderful, wonderful blessing. So,
I can only imagine.
in closing up, Jan, if people wanted to follow up with you and get a hold of you, or see some more of the things that you have going on, how can people get a hold of you?
They can email me. My Hotmail is jsmith592@hotmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, just under my normal regular name, Jan Smith. You can look me up on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram. Zombie592 is my Instagram, so you can look me up on Instagram. I post a little bit of art on Instagram, not a whole lot yet, but they can look me up there as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And speaking of art, I'm looking right behind you. I'm pretty sure that that's Tom Hodge's plan for what the Star Wars land is going to be.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah. Hilarious.
Nice.
Awesome. And how about
I
you,
love
Tom? Where can people get a
Um,
hold of you and follow what you've got going on?
for me, it's pretty easy. I mostly am on Facebook. You can get me at Mandalore the Uniter on Facebook. You can catch me on Twitter sometimes at Heed the Call. And if you want to learn how to build your own Mandalorian costume, you can go to mandalorianmercs.org. And that's pretty much it for me.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I had a wonderful time talking with you. We usually have these talks for about 40 minutes or so. We're closing in on an hour, which means that we really love this episode. And so in ending, I wanted to just say thank you again. I'm Spencer Brinkerhoff III, and you can find me at SpencerB3. That's Facebook, that's Instagram and Twitter. And we love talking about Star Wars, and we love doing it here. And we're going to do it again next week. Thank you all, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night.